I am a 13-year-old female and I live in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan around the Morsing Marquette area. And a side note, I live on Native American land far back in the woods. This story took place in about mid-August this year. I had invited one of my friends over at the time. She lived on a road we call Old Indian Town Road. I'm not a native, but have always felt some spirituality like natives. I consider myself a psychic. So my friend, who I will call Chloe, was doing teenage everyday things. Eventually she got bored. And we decided that we would go and see some cool things by ourselves. We got on our bikes. I decided to ride them around, and the most athletic of my friends. I play many sports and work out daily. Eventually, we met up with some other friends and got tired of riding up and down the short road we lived on. It got to the point where only 3 of us remained. In the beginning, there were around 8 or 9 of us in total. At this point, it was around 9:30 p.m. I have always been terrified of the dark. So at this given point, I started to get uneasy naturally. I wouldn't say I liked being surrounded by thick woods on either side at 10 o'clock at night either. So we started making our way back up the road. The road is on a relatively steep hill, steep enough to where most people camp by God without the struggle, even myself. I biked frequently, but I was tired from biking all day. So I strode up the hill, with my youngest person in the group right beside me. She started to get uneasy as well. The other friend was far behind us. He isn't a believer in anything supernatural. He was at the bottom of the hill, and we were near the halfway point. Suddenly, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. And I thought I was being paranoid at first, until I had the sudden strange feeling to look to my right. I suddenly snapped my head in that direction. My friend from behind me was looking down, talking to me about something, so she didn't notice me stop. We were on the far left of the road. And on the right there was a drop that ran down very far deep into the woods. Very tall pine trees were filling that deep trench. The woods were so thick you couldn't see the ground and the makeshift track. When I looked over though, I saw a tall skinny figure looking at me while clinging to one of those incredibly tall pine trees. It almost looked like an emaciated werewolf, but worse than its appearance was what it was doing. It swayed back and forth in the tree, almost like a big cat with large orange eyes, blinking at me occasionally. That's when my friend noticed I had stopped. She asked me what was wrong, and I didn't say anything. I didn't want to freak out anyone. I just started walking even faster. My guy friend was still at the bottom of the hill. My other friends and I were almost at the top. I had the worst feeling continuously washing over me. My girlfriend finally noticed how far ahead we were and booked it to catch up with us. When we returned to my house, I told them what we saw. The girl behind me agreed that she didn't see what I saw, but definitely felt uneasy when she saw me looking to the right and then speeding up. Nothing more happened that night. But the next day I was walking over to my next door neighbor's house. I was walking over to the girl who was with me when it all happened that day. She and I rode our bikes and talked about the night before. It was a lovely day. So we rode our bikes until the sun set again. At one point I went back to my house to grab something walking on the trail to get to her house. I got hit with a sense of dread. That's when she met me and she started running with me, because she felt that too. When we broke out, had the tree line into her backyard, we heard a scream that sent us bolting towards her house. To preface this, I am an avid hunter. And this is not my first time nor my last weird encounter I've seen while hunting. This encounter happened 2 years ago in December. And now on to the story itself. I went out hunting. I was hoping for a giant buck this day. On the drive to the spot where I parked my truck, I saw something, and it was truly odd. It was snowing out, so I could not see all that well. But I could have sworn I saw an outline of a person on a hill looking at me. It was my friend's land. It was private property, so no one should be here. But he let me and a few of our friends hunt here from time to time. So it was odd to see someone none of us knew were supposed to be here. And I was the only one of my friends who were supposed to be hunting today. I definitely made sure of that. I was thinking sure maybe somebody got lost. But there is so much signage that says this is private property, you'd have to be dumb to not see it. And it was so early in the morning. I figured it has to be somebody who doesn't have the greatest intentions. Anyway, I wasn't that worried. So I just parked my car and got out to my tree stand. I was there for a couple of hours and I did not see a thing. I was waiting for something to walk by as the forest started to fall silent. And if you're a hunter, and pretty much anyone, you would know that if that happens, it's never a good sign. But then I saw the perfect deer walk in front of me. It was alone and it was running, which was not all that uncommon. But it was frail looking. I did not fire at it at first. I just watched it. I looked behind it and something jumped on it. A white human-looking creature. I clutched my rifle and looked down my sights for a better look. But it must have heard me. It looked up at me and smiled, the most blood-chilling smile I've ever seen. I fired at it. It missed and hit the ground. It seemingly jumped back, freaked out, hissing at me. It started twitching and raising its head. And then everything suddenly froze. It froze in the air like something had happened. I could feel the utter malice this thing had for me. I reloaded as fast as possible and fired again. This time, in this thing's chest, it fell again. But this time it did not get back up. I sat there for at least an hour. I did not move in fear that this thing would get back up. Eventually, I got the energy to run back to my car. I got back in my car and drove away and did not look back. I don't know what that thing was. I've never seen it again. And I've never gone back. I just turned 16 years old and decided on my birthday to stay and visit my sister who lives in Cleveland, which is about an hour's drive away from my hometown. I had been there for a few days already. And since my birthday is on the 23rd of June, the 4th of July is right around the corner. I had been upstairs in the attic for a few days sleeping, playing GTA, and doing some other things to keep me occupied because I had nothing else to do since I couldn't drive yet and my sister was at work most of the time. One night, my sister Morgan and her boyfriend and they were sitting downstairs in the living room watching TV. When Nate asked if we wanted to go to the secluded park and lights and fireworks off, I immediately said sure, because I had nothing better to do when I knew some of the parks were secluded from the big city from Cleveland. So after about an hour of persuading Morgan to go, we all jump into his car. It's about 75 degrees out and it's about 1:30 a.m. It's a relatively nice night. We were driving for about 15 minutes when we finally reached this park. We are going down this giant hill when it suddenly gets exceptionally dark. There's no light pollution and no other artificial light. Just what you can see from the headlight. We're driving for 10 minutes when I see a deer on the side of the road, which is typical for a wooded park. Right? I look out my window and for a brief second, I see what looks like a giant deer face with glowing yellow eyes jerk behind this tiny tree and disappear entirely. I don't usually get freaked out by deer. Something about how fast it moves and how it just disappeared made me feel unsettled. It just looked wrong and I'm pretty sure deer's eyes shouldn't be glowing that way. We finally arrive at a parking lot facing a giant field, then the other side being whites. I still had a very unsettling feeling that I could not shake off. When we got out of the car, I noticed it had gotten cold outside, which doesn't make sense because it was just warmer. About a minute ago, I felt a noticeable chill. I was leaning on the car and my sister's boyfriend went to set up his firework. I still felt we needed to leave, but I couldn't shake off this feeling. So I told my sister that we should hurry up and go because I felt weird. My sister, stubborn, just said to me that I have too much superstition and need to chill out. I watched the fireworks go off and we all looked at the stars for a little bit. After getting in the car, we sat for a bit when I heard branches breaking and heavy footsteps. The feeling I had before worsened. So I told my sister and boyfriend we really had to get home. I noticed off in the tree line that there looked to be a deer. But there was something off about this deer. From what I could tell from the silhouette, it was standing on its hind legs, just staring at us, seemingly trying to hide behind a tree. While doing so, we eventually started driving off. Once we all got home, I still felt off about what I saw. I couldn't shake that feeling either. There was no way a deer had a big face like that. And there was no way he could stand on his hind legs, just staring at people for such a long time. The feeling I got was not expected. Afterward, I went upstairs to my attic room where my sister and I watched TV. I like to leave my windows open because the breeze from the lake feels good at night. I also like listening to traffic and crickets, and occasionally you can hear the birds early in the morning. It was about 3:30 to 4 when my sister and I were sitting there, and I told her what I saw. She shook it off and told me I had probably just seen a deer. Then I noticed outside that I didn't hear anything. It was just quiet. That isn't normal at all for Cleveland. Not the peaceful quiet, the eerie type of quiet. Then I heard a very loud whistling coming from different parts of the neighborhood. I thought there was no way a human would be whistling that loud. It just emanated from so far, but never lost its volume, let alone it was coming from all different directions at the same time. I closed the curtains and asked my sister if she heard it, and she replied with, "What are you talking about? I don't hear anything." Then the unsettling feeling set it again. And my stomach sank. I didn't sleep a week that night. I still don't know what I saw that day, nor what was whistling. But I'm hoping that I never have to see it again, or hear it again. I went to Joshua Tree National Park a few days ago in an Airbnb with 3 of my friends. The house was a nice size and had to be accessed by an unpaved dirt road. The closest place to us was maybe a mile or 2 away. All the homes in this area have private driveway. On one of our drives back from getting groceries, I saw an animal run away from our headlights very fast, but I couldn't quite make it out. I assumed it had to be a deer or something along those lines, because of how big it was. But all I had seen thus far were desert quails. That night, I dreamt that my friends and I were searching for something. And we were taken to a basement of all things. And it was full of all sorts of strange oddities. It was a small house with a red door. We went inside, but I don't remember what was there. This may or may not have anything to do with my experience. I read that dreams do often correlate with experiences though. On one of the nights of our stay, we had a bonfire and did some stargazing. I had to pee at one point. So I went inside and was gone for maybe 5 minutes max. When my friend and I returned, my 2 other friends weren't sitting by the fire anymore. So I just sat and waited for a couple of minutes for them to come back. But I went inside to check on them eventually. But they weren't there either. We go back out and start calling for them and get no response. Instead, we hear coughing coming from the right side of the house where the pool area was. We immediately knew it was our friend because they had been reserved. Our first instinct was to find and help them. At some points during our trip, we had gotten concerned that they were sick, but they ended up feeling much better. We started looking for them by the pool, but we call again and we get no response. But we do hear the same coughing, the same pitch, everything. It's almost like a mimic. It was the same cough, maybe 4 or 5 times in a row. We thought our friend was throwing up or maybe smoking. Usually when we called for them though, they would answer immediately. Except for this time, there was just more coughing. The last time we called, they had finally answered and started coming around from the opposite side of the house from where we were. Unfortunately, the sound of them walking and talking went from the left side of the house just seconds after we heard them coughing on the right side. And they were utterly oblivious to everything that was happening. They had no idea about the coffee, and didn't even hear us calling until they got closer to the house. As soon as I realized the coughing was a lure for us, it confirmed that something had been keeping an eye on us. Based on what I've read, I'm not sure if this is a skinwalker experience and not deer experience or something similar. I'll answer any questions. I also need to know if I should go get cleansed. This can't be chalked up to hearing things because of weed. We all have high tolerances, and weed doesn't make you hear things. Anybody who says that has clearly never really smoked. We were both very aware, and I was probably the superest it was hushed to. We had to turn off the music because we were talking. We ended up smoking later that night, and the friend we thought we heard coughing had such a soft cough that you could barely listen to it. The pitch of the coughing we heard specifically sounded like our friend, but as if it was stuck in their throat or throwing up.